Sculpt an eyeball. What we're going to do is we're going to keep the quarter out. We're going to take one piece of foil out and we're going to put it out on our table. What we want to do right now is we want to get a little pinch of clay. All right? We want to get a piece of clay that's going to make a little sort of egg-like shape that is the size of a quarter. Now, how do you know if you've got enough clay? You won't until you sort of mush it all together. So the first thing I'm going to do is take that little pinch of clay and I'm going to rub it between my hands like I'm making a meatball. When I look at that meatball, I want to look for things like cracks, folds, and crevices. When you see those little things like what you saw right over there, you want to kind of smooth them out. See that little tiny fold in there? We'll smoothen that out and we'll go over there. I'm going to quickly just compare my little dot of clay to my quarter, and I'm going to see that the piece of clay that I got is a little bit on the small side. So I'm going to pinch just a little bit more clay, and then I'm going to add it to that, mushing it together with my fingertips like what you see right now, so it looks like a little bit of like a rock. And then I'm just going to roll it between my hands to try to make it almost like a meatball. When I set this up and I have it kind of round, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and take a look and just make sure it's smooth all the way around. Now, that might not be perfectly round, but again, we don't want any little folds or cracks. And once you have it, then you can kind of compare it to the quarter that you have. And what you should see is that it might be almost exactly the same size as the quarter, or a little bit smaller is okay. If you have really big hands, you can work a little bit larger than the quarter, but this is going to represent our eye. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take this and I'm going to slowly sort of pat it down into the foil on the table that I'm working at. I don't want to flatten this out completely. What I want to do is keep it like a semicircle where one side is round and the other side is flat. You can start to see what I'm doing right now. So one side is completely flat and the other side is round. It's like a hamburger bun or like the top of a mushroom, things like that. But we want to keep it so it is basically round on one side and flat on the other. This is going to be the start of creating an eye. So the rounder this is, the more like an eye it's going to be. We want to keep it flat because eventually we're going to make things like this that attach to a face. We don't need it to be a full circle. So that's going to be my eye. You're going to see that my eye is a little bit bigger than my quarter, almost exactly the same size. That is a good size to work with. You don't want to make this really, really large. You don't want to make this teeny tiny. The smaller you make it, the more difficult it's going to be to work with. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab really just a tiny, tiny pinch of clay, just rubbing it through my fingers, and I'm going to make a little tiny ball, just a tiny, tiny little ball. And that's going to be stuck on one side of this clay. Doesn't matter which side you stick it on, but if you press it in just a little bit, it's going to stick to that clay. And you can see what I have so far over here. I have my half dome, and I have a little tiny piece. It doesn't matter which side you put it on. It really, whichever eye you're going to make, the right or the left, we're only going to make one for our practice. You're going to see how that works. So we're going to start off, we've got our little half dome, and we've got our little eye. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch another piece of clay, and about the same size as the eyeball, I'm going to roll it up and sort of set it up the same exact way. Luckily, through the magic of art, I've already prepared one of these over here. So you can see my second little eyeball. It's about the same size, all right? And what I want to do with that is I want to start pinching this together, all right? So I'm going to start taking with my fingers and I'm starting to flatten it out. Now, what you can see is I'm not making it into one big rectangle, but I'm trying to make it sort of longer and thinner as I work. Now, the biggest thing I'll tell you about when you're working with clay like this, we don't want to make that clay really, really thin, okay? So you can see the most important thing is to try to keep the thickness of that clay even all the way through. Now, if it's really thick or really thin, it's not as bad as if it's thin in one spot and thick in another. So we're trying to keep it even, and what you can see is I'm kind of stretching that out a little bit as I work along. So I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm not going to work too fast. But what you see I've done is I've taken another little eyeball, and this one I've sort of stretched out, pinched down, and I've made this sort of long rectangular piece. And again, I'm working with the same amount of clay that I worked with for the original eye. You can see the shape that I've made. You can see that there's no cracks. There may be some bumps and things like that, but no cracks, no folds, and no lines. All right, and we're going to make that. This is going to be the start of the eyelid, and I want you to take a look real quick on how thick I've made it. I want you to see in comparison to like the quarter, so it's much thicker than the quarter. So don't make this too thin. It should be approximately the same size as what you see right now that I have. Now we're going to make this the lower lid first. How we're going to do that is we're going to take our finger and we're going to kind of just lightly press into this. And what you see that I'm doing is I'm starting to curve that little shape that I made a minute ago. Again, it's very important that the thickness remains the same. And again, I'm just going to push a little bit with my finger to kind of curve this around. Okay? This is going to represent the lower lid, and it really doesn't have to be that curved, but you can see it's almost like a little smile. I'm going to first lay that over top of the eye that I have over here. And what you're going to see is I want to kind of lay this down so it still has that sort of curve, and then I could just see just a little bit of that tiny little eye muscle. You can see the way I've sort of set mine up right over here. So I have the original ball that I made the eye. I've also have the little tear duct, and now I've put the lower lid down. I'm just going to press it in ever so slightly, just so everything sticks together. You can see when I pick it up, it all sticks together. But you can see how thick the lower lid is. I wouldn't make it thinner than that. We also can't get back in here and smoothen this out later. So you want to make sure that you did a good job of sort of making that edge nice and even. And we're going to have it right there, and that's going to be our lower lid. We've got our eyeball, our tear duct, and our lower lid. And now all we want to do is we want to make an upper lid. If you haven't guessed already, it's going to be very similar to the thing I just did. Again, we're going to start off with a piece of clay that is approximately like the size of our quarter. We're going to mush that all together, make sure that there's no folds or creases, pinching it together with my fingers. I'm going to roll it around in my hand until I have basically a nice smooth egg-like shape. If I see any cracks or crevices, I will smooth that out with my finger and then continue to roll until I have a nice smooth shape. And then I'm going to just start pinching again. And just exactly the same way we made our lower lid is the same way we're going to make our upper lid. We're just going to pinch this out. You're not going to try to do it too fast. If you try to stretch this out like you're playing with a piece of Silly Putty or Play-Doh, it's just going to rip and tear. So the key to this thing is taking your time and pinching it a little bit at a time and really making sure that you keep the whole thickness of this all about the same. And you really want to make the same, almost the same exact piece that you made earlier for your lower lid. And we can take a look at that and we can see what that looks like right there. Now, this edge here is going to be our edge of the eyelid, so it's really important that we make sure it looks nice and smooth. So any sort of imperfections or anything that you might have, that's something you want to kind of roll your finger over. Now, just like we made the lower lid, remember we curved this thing, we're going to curve the upper lid a little bit more. So what you're going to see is I'm just going to drag my finger over this, and when we make that sort of smile, we're going to make a bigger, deeper smile. So it's going to be a little bit more rounded. And if you realize once you've done that, you've kind of made some imperfections in there, go back in and smoothen that out. And you see this one, obviously, we're going to turn it up the other way. And this one's going to be more curvier than the first one we made. Now, before we kind of press this in, we want to kind of line this thing up to the eyeball. Now, we can make the eye a little more closed. We can make it a little more open. But what we want is we don't want to see through to our sort of foil. So what I want to do is I want to find a good placement where I don't cover up that little tiny bit of the eye muscle and that I don't see through to the other pockets of the foil. I'm going to delicately press this into it just so it sticks. And now the last little bit is mushing the top lid together with the lower lid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here on the edges and I'm just going to blend the two pieces together. I don't want to get in here and ruin the corners of the eyes. You can see what I've done right over there. I just want to kind of blend those two pieces together. I'm going to do the same thing on the inside of the eye, very carefully not to mush and smash any of that detail. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag my finger over this until that sort of fold or that crease disappears. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is our first practice. That's an eye. All right, we're going to make more complicated eyes, and I'm going to show you how to make some other details and things to the eyelids eventually, but this is our first start over here. What you want to see is that the two pieces of clay, the top lid and the lower lid, have been melded together over here. You can see that on the opposite side too. I put the top lid on over the lower lid. I did the lower lid first. You can see the edges in here have not been sort of smushed or mashed out, and you can still see my little tear duct over there. This is our first practice. I'm going to give you the entirety of tomorrow's class to do that. I did it in about 10 minutes. In fact, I did almost 2 of them in about 15 minutes. So tomorrow you're going to have all class to work on this. I'm even going to give you time on Friday because I realize a lot of you will only be getting your clay tomorrow or the next day. My goal is that you have this completed for Monday after the break. So this video is going to be posted. Feel free to watch it as many times as you need.